We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You know, I always tell people that my music is violent so that I don't have to be. And that's the power behind music like punk, heavy metal, etc. I never met the person who really takes classical music to the gym. So whenever anybody asks me, is metal really motivating? I'm like, absolutely. And why did you do metal motivation? Because what metal did for me is what I do for others. And that's what it means to be a metal motivator.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I have often talked about when I was a very small kid, probably 8, 9 years old. That was my introduction into metal, and it was through my older brother and his friends. And so it was Black Sabbath, it was Dio, it was Iron Maiden, and that was kind of in that heyday when metal was still not mainstream.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
That's
in that, and it's interesting because it always kind of goes through those waves and everybody puts things into categories and stuff. But like when I first heard it, it was just this big production and this power. And for my brother, he absolutely loved it. He loved the artwork. And that was like, even at that age, his thing was, I'm going to grow up and be an album cover artist. Like that's what I'm going to do, you know.
Yeah, right.
Simultaneously, he's also putting on shows in our carport wearing a Gene Simmons Halloween mask and wearing my mom's like 1970s platform boots and using his little baseball bat as his bass guitar while he's playing Kiss's Rock and Roll Over album. You know, he's like 10 years old. Like that was his thing. So for me, like that was my introduction to metal. And there's still some bands like that I'll go back and forth with and listen to. And then of course I transitioned into punk and a lot of other music, you know. But for you now, like how were you young, like really young when you first got into it, or like how did it just?
I don't look my age. I just turned 59.
Okay.
I don't color my hair. I can't explain it. I don't know what weird thing happened in my genes. My kids are the same way. I don't know. Again, I have no idea. So people think I'm a lot younger than I am. So I was obviously old enough at the time to be influenced by my generation's Beatles was Kiss. So when Kiss came on the scene in the 70s, like with the Beatles in that previous generation, it was the when the Beatles showed up on what's his name's show.
Yeah, Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan, yeah.
Yeah.
And then for me, it was the Halloween Paul Lynde special with Kiss. Did their television appearance. It's the first time we'd ever seen them. And so for us, it was the introduction to that kind of thing. Now, the first heavy song I've ever heard was Helter Skelter by the Beatles. And that one's pretty scary in and of itself. It's still a pretty heavy song if you think about it. But, you know, there was no escaping the disco era and all of that. We were all influenced by that. As little kids, we didn't know any better.
Yeah.
So we just kind of held everything in our head. Queen, Kiss, you know what I mean? Thin Lizzy, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then it all changed. I had relocated to Texas from New York in 1979. And we were outside slaving in the Texas heat because my stepdad wanted us to dig up that Texas clay for some reason. I don't know, he's planting a tree or whatever. But there was a bunch of teenagers who wanted nothing to do with us across the street. This is summertime, and their car windows were down, like a Camaro or something. And they were cranking this music. And I heard this siren to start this song. Boom, boom, boom.
Oh, yeah.
All of a sudden, Running with the Devil by Van Halen. I didn't know who it was. This is 1979. I was transfixed. I was having a religious experience. But I'm trying to dig and I'm listening to this music. It's cranking out of their stereo. And then it ends. Well, what comes next? Eruption. I just, you know what I mean? It's like just when you thought something couldn't get any better. So I'm elated, confused, enraptured all at the same time. And it was, you know, again, other stuff was just rock and roll, Styx, Bad Company, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
When I first heard Van Halen in 79, that changed everything. So within a very short time, because I still had family in New York, I would go back every summer to New York. Well, as I go back over the next couple of years, something is happening that I don't know about. So I'm turning on my friends when I go back to New York to like ZZ Top, LaGrange, the early ZZ Top, which was heavy. And they were like, because I noticed they had jean jackets on with buttons and patches.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell are all these Iron Maiden, Angel Witch, Budgie, Def Leppard, Raven, Accept, Scorpions, even though they're not British. This was, so this is like 1981, maybe by this time. So I'm getting my first taste around a campfire in Westchester, New York over the summer of the new wave of British heavy metal. So I heard Iron Maiden for the first time. And I said, okay, this is not Van Halen. This is not Styx. This is not this is something completely different. And that's when that was the true life change. One was the musical taste elevating with Van Halen. This was a life change. I started to dress different, act different. Everything changed. And then it happened again a couple of years later, rummaging around. I was in high school, 1983. I was rummaging around in the record store, and the only thing I could do to find music I wanted, I had to go to the import section. And so I went to the import section and I found this band. I just looked at it because it had the word metal in it, but it said Metallica, and so it was the demo version of it, but it was in the import section. So I got it and took it home. And I said, my first thought was, because the first song hit the lights, I thought, is this punk?
Yeah.
But the songs went too long. And then by the time you got to Seek and Destroy, it had time changes and the songs are freaking 7 minutes long. And you're like, okay, well, this is not punk.
Right. Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, throughout all that time, there was Quiet Riot and Ozzy and, Motley Crue came on this. So, yeah, I mean, we dabbled in that, but none of that. That was just sort of more additives. Those were supplemental.
Yeah.
By the time we got to Metallica, I was done. And by the time then the album Theater of Pain came out with Motley Crue, with Pink and Sequins and all this horse shit. Yeah. I said, to hell with the only glam band I kept in the repertoire was Wasp.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Other than that, we were into Merciful Fate and Slayer and all the thrash bands and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was like when you talked about Metallica's like demo, and when anytime someone says Metallica, immediately I go back to, I think it was around 1986 or 87 when I first heard them, and it was Master of Puppets. And that's because they had they were almost like Motorhead is, where punk and metal fans kind of can agree. They both love Motorhead, and then thrash metal or whatever bracket you want to put it in. But when I first heard Metallica, Master of Puppets, it was just like, to me, it was like that fast, powerful sound. And then, of course, they're linked in with Pusshead, this artist with Zorlak skateboards. And my brother got a Metallica skateboard. It's like the first one to come into the city. And that was the big thing, like, oh my gosh. And that was, this, and for the listeners who don't know a whole lot maybe about the history of Metallica, they got really big in the metal scene very quickly, in my opinion, like very quickly, like everybody started just gravitating to it. It's been like, man, this like power and energy and speed involved in it. And then what's crazy is to like flash forward. And then when like, I think One was like a video that started getting a lot of play later, several albums later. And then you start to kind of see them going into all these different realms and slowing some sounds down. And then you flash forward to when Load came out, and I was in the Army at the time. And I remember like kind of phasing out of listening to a whole lot of Metallica, and my roommate had that Load album. And I thought, this is just like stripped down, like old style to me, like old style, like rock. Like, okay. I can get into this again, you know. And then people were hating me when I would go, hey, I dig like, you know, Hero of the Day and stuff like that. Like I like these songs. They're like, oh, it's not real Metallica. I'm like, I've never played any instruments, so I don't understand when someone switches it up like that. I just know what it sounds like to me. So I can't critique and be like, oh.
Well, yeah. I mean, the history is interesting when you look at what was happening culturally. I mean, the 90s was the 90s. The 90s did its job on everybody. And so a lot of the bands suffered, particularly glam bands. You know, Metallica was able to make its shift with the Black Album, but you would never have had the success of the Black Album if it wasn't for the song One, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because that was a video. And even though it's slow, it has the one part where it introduces that basic.
Yeah.
So now that's when your little sister started liking Metallica. That's when she was hearing that chugging guitar for the very first time. So the market was in essence warmed for what would happen with the Black Album. The Black Album came early enough in the 90s for it to still. It didn't have to go complete grunge, like more like Load and Reload did, in order for it to have that appeal.
Yeah.
But by then, you know, most of your metalheads were switching into what was happening down in Tampa, which was the rise of death metal. So Cannibal Corpse and Death and all of these things, you know, that was, you know, that was metal at a whole nother level, unless if you're going to stay more towards the mainstream, then it was Pantera. And I knew the guys in Pantera.
Well, I was going to ask with the Texas connection.
Yeah, I used to go see them, and Daryl and I were friends. We actually dated these best friends, these two chicks. Daryl and I actually went to go see U2 together at Reunion Arena. I think it was on the Sunday Bloody Sunday tour.
Oh, okay.
And Daryl had a bright idea if we just sit, because we were like, I don't know, 14 or 15 rows back, kind of towards the middle. So we just sit here because we're the only long-haired guys there, and just hold up, both of us hold up middle fingers at Bono. He'll see us, you know. So we held him up for the longest time, you know. But at that time, it's not the Daryl. He went by the moniker Diamond Daryl Lance, not Dimebag. He did not party. I've got a picture of him we took in the bathroom at this club called Matley's, and he's holding a beer. It's not even his beer, dude. He didn't stay out and party. I mean, he's still kind of a nut, but he was kind of more of just a kid who put like firecrackers in mailboxes. That's the amount of hell raising he did at that time.
Okay. Yeah.
But he was fearless, you know. But no, back in those days, man, it was known Daryl would, as soon as they finished their set, you know, 1:30 in the morning, he'd go home and practice, dude. You know, because he would win. We had the Dallas citywide guitar contest, best guitar player every year, and he would win every year.
Okay.
That's when we started playing Dean guitars, is because Dean would sponsor it, and so they'd give away these guitars, and so he would get these Deans. Well, they got tired of him winning, so they made him a judge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't until Phil came and replaced Terry Glaze on vocals that they did the power metal album, and then that was still kind of like their old style. I never really called them glam. They weren't really glam. They were more of like a souped up riot. They were better than, in my opinion, than a Motley Crue. They were just naturally better. Just Daryl, you couldn't hold a candle to Daryl. But so by the time Cowboys from Hell came out, you know, again, round about that same time as Metallica's Black Album, it was a power move on their part, because in this, and if I ever get a chance to sit down with Phil, I'm going to ask him about this, because my profession ultimately is marketing. And what they did was probably the most courageous move any band could have made during that time, because there is no grunge album for a Pantera. By the time you get to their last album, it's still in the 90s. It's called Reinventing the Steel.
Okay. Yeah.
That was their FU to whatever was going on with new metal and grunge. They didn't give a rat's ass about any of it. But everybody was, all the music critics were saying metal is dead. Get away from this music. You shouldn't be listening to it. You should be listening to whatever's coming out of Seattle, whatever the hell was going on. But Pantera was smart. They let everybody run from the moniker metal, and which meant they were the last man standing.
Yeah.
So they embraced the label. And so then you get the next album, vulgar display of power and, far beyond driven. And then what I thought was a great branding move, they called the one album Great Southern Trend Kill. So what they did is they hung an albatross around the neck of the entire 90s, right in the middle of the 90s. You're just a trend. They were saying grunge is a trend, and we are the Great Southern Trend Kill.
Yeah.
So that was a very powerful move, a branding move on their part, and I think it ultimately worked for them. But Metallica went through their spiel, and I think Metallica's still unsure of themselves. I always, when I'm in private conversation, Metallica is one of me and Pat Mack, my buddy, we talked about offline. We'll talk about Metallica. We'll be like, if an outsider starts dissing Metallica, we're going to defend Metallica.
Right.
But in our personal conversations, we're going to talk all kinds of shit about Metallica.
Yeah. So they're like your brother and cousins.
Exactly. You're going to defend them, but if we want to talk about them, what a dick they. No, it's just Metallica. I just think, you've made enough money. It's not a money issue. Come on, be serious. The last albums, I see no musical exploration in any of this stuff. None of it. None of it is breaking new grounds. Okay, so you're not young anymore. You're not going to be able to break new ground creatively. Ergo, therefore, just for grins and giggles, make a metal record. Make a real metal record. Just for the hell of it. It's not going to cost you anything, man. But that's kind of where that is. But again, there's so many more bands now, so much more, and the crossovers have been phenomenal. And I was going to say this earlier when you were talking, I think that's one thing that people may not be fully aware of. Like I told somebody that I saw a video, I forget who it was. Was it Dead Kennedys? It was like 78, 79, something like that.
Okay.
And dude, you'd have thought you were watching 1998 thrash show. The way the stage diving and the moshing and the whatever. You know what I mean? It all of the movements was as contemporary as now, which means thrash has to acknowledge who created this.
Yeah.
And they talk a lot about Motorhead, and I'm like, nah, it's not really Motorhead, bro. I never saw anybody jumping up on the stage on a Motorhead show. They would have never tolerated that. Motorhead was like I think it was Lemmy who said it. It's like Eddie Cochran sped up.
Okay.
It's just more like 50s Eddie Cochran, ain't no song for the summertime blues. No. That's Motorhead. That's why it was very repetitive. It's like, like this. Like AC/DC, for those about to rock, it's the last AC/DC album I listened to, because everything else is the same.
Yeah,
everything past Ace of Spades is Ace of Spades. Basically, you know what I mean? There's no new formula to it. So I don't think everybody acknowledges enough of what was happening at that time, especially again that critical time, late 70s, when punk is even having to transition into the 1980s itself, because fucking everybody from Blondie to Flock of Seagulls to bands that played at CBGBs all the time, dude, were now mainstream. And so now punk had to differentiate itself from new wave, right? So unless it be considered like the Knack or something like that. And that gave birth to, again, the DRIs and Agnostic Front, Black Flag, again, just more of a hardcore sound, because it had to purge everything else out. And those early metal bands, hearing that hardcore sound, even COC, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. So that is essentially, when you bring that up. So, and now it's funny, depending on who I talk to, I just always use punk as like the overarching umbrella. But now there are people, who have PhDs and they write, a thesis on the American hardcore movement, and so now people are going, well, the 80s, what you're calling punk it was hardcore and everything was sped up and it was fast and there were pits and people were stage diving, like you're saying. And I'm like, yeah, I'm cool with that too. Like you call it hardcore, you call it whatever, but everything from, the California scene, like Dead Kennedys and all these bands at that time had that energy that in the late 70s, early 80s started to kind of pollinate all over the US. And when you said COC, Corrosion Conformity, I can't think of a band from the South that was like breaking ground and their scene, and they're from a Raleigh, North Carolina area for the listeners. Feel free, if you've never heard them, you can't, like, every album is completely different, and their sound has changed so much from the very early 80s when they started. And a lot of that is they've changed lineups and sounds, and it sounds like they were always into different sounds. But for everybody down in the South, like for me, that put all of the South on the map. Yeah. So when you go back and look at bands like Metallica, you'll find pictures of Metallica in whatever Thrasher magazine or any of the like Hit Parade or whatever. And here's this huge band Metallica, and they're wearing like a Corrosion Conformity shirt, a COC shirt, and you could tell like that bands are all influenced by one another. But when you mention New York with like Agnostic Front and all those now that are kind of, or for years have been called that New York hardcore sound. Right. I think Agnostic Front is one of those bands that has been consistently touring and putting out records and putting out energy. And my wife and I went and saw them with Murphy's Law last year, I think it was. And then they just came through recently. We went, out last year and talked to Roger and talked to Vinny and them, because the great thing about these bands, you go see them and they put on all this energy. They also have time for everybody to talk to them. And to me, that resonated when I was a kid and still does to this day. And I think that a lot of bands, especially like when people talk about thrash and stuff, all those bands probably at some point had an Agnostic Front record somewhere, in their background.
Had to.
And when you talked about how you look, like, you look young. If I had to guess, I would have put you at about 47, 47 and a half, maybe, right? Mm. I think there is a legit fountain of youth, and it's in music, and it's people that can tap into music, exercise, living a healthy lifestyle. But there is something about watching Agnostic Front take the stage, and these guys are in their 50s, late 50s, and they're still putting out energy like they were 18 years old. Yep. Another band like that, and they've got their history, and sadly it's a lot of negativity within the band and infighting with Cro-Mags.
Oh yeah.
Like, man, Cro-Mags' Age of Quarrel album, I always recommend to people, because to this day it's still one of my favorite hardcore albums out of that scene. But Metallica's lead singer has been quoted as saying the best live band he had ever seen was Cro-Mags when they toured with Metallica way back then. I think it was Best Wishes album. I can't remember which album it was, but Cro-Mags were on tour and opening for Metallica, and he just described like the pure energy when Cro-Mags took the stage, and just the pit, stage dives, and all that. I don't know. I'm always interested in hearing like if I were talking to any of the members of like Pantera back then, I would want to know too, like, hey, what is it that you're listening to? Because I got turned on to them with Vulgar Display of Power. Yeah. Watching Headbangers Ball, and I saw one of the videos, and I think it was Walk, I can't remember, but either way, but I saw the video and I was like, damn, like I got to get that. I bought the tape, and to me and I could be completely wrong, but I was like, man, they're just stripped down, metal, but also influences of that hardcore sound. Like, to me, that's what that vibe almost like.
And that's the Phil vibe. That's what Phil brought. When you look at a song like Domination, it's
Mhm.
it's pure punk. It's not even thrash. It's
Yeah.
punk. And
Mhm.
I think that's where again, the importance of what Phil Anselmo brought to that band, and Pantera became the template for something different in the American scene, because all you really had was the coast,
Mhm.
both coasts, New York, with Anthrax and Overkill, and then you go West Coast and you had, of course,
Mhm.
the Bay Area and,
Mhm.
whoever was still coming out of Los Angeles, like Slayer. But
Mhm.
that was a distinct sound. Pantera was not thrash per se. They had thrash elements to it, but
Mhm.
you had such a good guitar player. Because if you listen to, I mean, like, who's the best lead guitar player out of all the thrash bands?
Mhm.
Well, I don't know, because I
It's
mean,
also fast.
what's your favorite
Yeah.
lead from a thrash band? No, it's just
Yeah.
shredding. It's just
Yeah.
literal shredding, right? It wasn't
Mhm.
until Daryl came in and brought in a Van Halen-esque
Mhm.
style to lead guitar playing within the thrash community, and I think they became then the prototype for what would later come with Lamb of God, Shadows
Mhm.
Fall, these kind of Chimera, these kind of American bands. And then hardcore itself kind of morphed, because it's the danger with anything. It's, when
Mhm.
punk started, it started almost in reaction to what was happening with where mainstream rock was at that time, with
Mhm.
freaking Yes and Genesis and Led Zeppelin, and just every band was bigger than God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the stages were big as shit and way the hell up there. And there's such a disconnect between you and the audience. And who the hell can play? Who the hell can make a double prog album? You know what I mean? Who's gonna
Yeah.
who's gonna
Yeah.
write another Roundabout like
Yeah.
Yes?
Mhm.
So these guys just pick up instruments and they're just playing.
Yeah.
And they're
Mhm.
playing in small places where there's no gate between you and the crowd is coming up on stage. The music is
Yeah.
aggressive, and it just, so but then punk itself had a challenge, because it started so raw. But what are you going to do when the players in your punk band become better at their instruments?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Look what
Mhm.
happened to Suicidal.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I mean, the first album was freaking, that was a landmark, dude. Who comes out of the gates with that?
Yeah.
Holy shit. And I mean, they got mainstream, their video, they played the hell out of that video.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that was one of, so my brother came home with a cassette tape. I was 10 years old. Cassette tape, Dead Kennedys on one side, like dubbed, you like your
Mhm.
buddy records
Yeah.
it or whatever. The other side, Suicidal Tendencies.
Mm.
Dude, if you would have put money on it back then, I would swear that I skated like skateboard. I skated better listening to Suicidal
Oh
Tendencies.
my
Like
gosh, dude.
it was just like you said, like and maybe it was offline. We were talking about like exercise or working out, like certain music you play and you just get like in the moment, you're like, it's like we were
Yeah.
kids. I was
Yeah.
like, man, when Suicidal hits, like I don't know, I skate better. Hey,
Yeah.
this is
Well,
this is a crazy thing. Um, so remember how Suicidal looked back then? That image, the blue
right.
bandanas,
Hmm.
and all the like. What
Chicano
would have
kind of
been
look.
back then? What's
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. That kind of LA
LA
Latino
gang, yeah,
gang thing. Yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting now because there's like all these documentaries and stories coming out for everybody that wasn't in that scene, what it was like when Suicidal would come in and play a show,
Yeah.
and all these dudes would show up with like blue flags or
Hmm.
blue bandanas wrapped around their head and on display, and then the pit would start and they get in the pit, but then people would be like beefing and fighting and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was funny at that age. I had no idea what my future was going to be. That
Hmm.
that looking into the future, I'd become a cop and then work gangs and do it on all these different levels and FBI task force and all that stuff, and then really get into the gang culture and break down everything. Like,
Yeah.
so when I say blood gangs, I'm talking about different sets, nations, their history, rank structure, what this hand sign means, what this means. So, years ago, I was building out this class to teach my department, some others, and it was like I'm doing a block on MS-13, and so there are like all these different gangs that claim the 13, that attach 13 to their name. And so as I'm building this class, I like to joke a lot too when I teach. Like, I'm not a robot. I'm not like screaming and yelling. I don't know. It's like, some of my courses are a week long. So we're going to be in a classroom doing things. So I build it out, and I'm like to me, studying the history of MS-13 and understanding why hand signs are the way they are, because I'm a nerd at heart in that sense. Like, I want to know why, and I always love when worlds start to kind of connect. And so it's everybody talks about MS-13 now, like, years ago, they kind of hit the mainstream, and now they're back in news stories and stuff because of high level arrest and stuff like that. So the burning question I always ask people is, do you know where the traditional MS hand sign comes from? And for those people that are fully understanding what I mean, here, I'll show you a picture. So here's a back tattoo, right? Yeah. It's just MS, and it's a devil horns hand sign, right? And then you get to, like, they put it up on graffiti, that sort of thing. So I always ask people, like, where do you think that came from? To you, when you see
to me,
that,
it looks it's a heavy metal sign
all day long, right? All day long. So in class, I'll throw up this slide because I have to teach people, because not everybody's into metal. The hand sign came directly from Ronnie James Dio.
How funny.
Meaning the original members of MS, when they first started, you got to go all the way back to the very early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. These kids were growing up in LA. Their families had fled El Salvador because there was so much violence going on, and made their way up to LA and settled in. And as they're learning the American culture and the neighborhoods they're living in, they're getting victimized by existing gangs that are already there, like 18th Street, different blood sets and Crip sets, and whatever else they had going on back then. And so these kids that all kind of shared the culture of El Salvador and their family history, but they were growing up, in this American neighborhoods and fighting and getting victimized. So they band together, like almost all gangs start, group of people getting, victimized by other gangs. They band together, they create their identity of MS, and they were all into heavy metal back then. So these dudes are like, long hair, ripped up jeans, and they loved Ronnie James, they loved Dio. And so, of course, when they would start squaring off with these gangs, they would throw that hand sign, and it started messing with rival gangs, because these dudes were headbangers, and they would throw out like sorcery terms and devil worshiping type of things, and put them horns on. And so that started becoming like, hey, don't mess with these MS guys. Like they're into some crazy stuff. So that was the whole inspiration. And then, flash forward, generations later, sadly, this has become a transnational gang, and El Salvador's got decades of violence now because of guys that, get deported out of LA and get down there and spread MS down there. But it was like all of that originated back from headbangers and that hand sign. But, when I'm teaching cops and deputies and agents, most of them don't even know the history of, like, even Dio performing and why Dio does that hand sign, So it's like, it's like, just to entertain me, I go, man, that's crazy. We can trace back this hand sign all the way back to these headbanger kids. There's no way they would have known when they formed it what it would become. Like a lot of other things, like it after generations, it begins to morph and get into something absolutely horrible now. But I always kind of trip out on that, like, man, I ask it all the time, and most people are like, who cares? Like, why would anybody care about the origin of a hand sign? Like, just go out there and arrest somebody for a robbery or shooting.
We nerd out on that stuff.
We do. And also, man, how crazy is that when you approach somebody to work as an informant or a source, and you need to build rapport, or you just want them to kind of calm down so they themselves don't make a mistake and you have to arrest them or whatever. Or sometimes they see a loved one get shot or whatever, and you just kind of, as a human being, you want them to feel a little bit better, calm down. And yeah, they can be gang members, but you sit there and talk about the history of each gang, depending on the gang member. You go into depth with like explaining to them, like, hey, you throw up that hand sign. Do you know the history of it? And that's a 10-minute, 15-minute conversation. And dudes are like, man, I didn't even know that. Like, that's crazy. Like, yeah, I push my glasses up. That's crazy. Now let's try not to kill each other out here in the street. Right. You know what I mean? Like, hey, and while you're at it, dude, like, I know you're into like, this rapper and that rapper. Like, check out some Dio, man. Your original founding members might dig it a little bit.
Yeah. No, it's amazing the influence that heavy metal had at so many levels. And I'll often reference that metal, because people who are not familiar with it or only have their perceptions about it culturally, they don't see it as a positive thing, much like you alluded to punk. They don't see it as positive. Yeah. No, it's absolutely positive. I said at the outset, my music is violent, so I don't have to be. There's a cathartic element to it, because you get to channel your aggression. I remember, being in Texas, especially during the 80s when we were growing our hair out and all of that. It was taboo. And so we had in our schools what you call ropers. So that was all the kids into country and cowboy crap and all of that. And there was tons of cowboy bars. Okay, so if you want to go somewhere and get the hell beat out of you or see 5 fights, go to a country bar. Just go to a country bar. Yeah. Now, you would think with all the violent lyrics of heavy metal that there's going to be even more fights at a heavy metal bar. Nope. No fights. None whatsoever. Right, yeah. Safest place to be. Isn't it funny, though, that you go to these country places where they beat the living hell out of each other, and yet listen to the lyrics of their music. Yeah. So love, farms, tractors, trucks, grandpa, her dress, tight jeans. Yeah. But you know why that is? Because there's no catharsis through their music. You can't channel your anger, your rage, your frustration. You can't channel negative energy through a stupid, sappy song. And there's a lot of country I love. You know what I mean? Me too. But the thing is that there's no cathartic element, even through the great country, even what's been happening over the past several years with Red Dirt down in Texas, or Texas country, whatever you want to call it, Cody Jinks, that kind of stuff. It's, it's great, but it's still not cathartic. It's still not cathartic. You need that aggression. And that's just not just in the lyrics, but it's in the rhythm. It's in everything else. That's what gets you. So by the time you get to work and you've been listening to whatever heavy music on the way there, you're not ready to punch somebody in the face. You got it out in the truck, in the cab of your truck on the way there. So and I think that's what people miss when they just judge it for what's ostensible, what's surface, what's just ornaments. You know what I mean? With the look or what have you, the devil's horns or the skulls and all this kind of stuff. Nah, man, that's just macabre. It's just vaudeville. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Now, I'm going to switch up. You had mentioned Pat Mack earlier, right? Yeah. So you guys have been doing what I think is really cool stuff now for quite a few years, right? Yeah. And like you and I talked a little bit offline about that. In this world or category realm or whatever of podcasting, I get burned out on a lot of people who come from a military background, especially like in special operations world, and then it's almost like they bark it down people's throat, or they put on these kind of airs because they need that ego stroke, because now they're out, they're back to the world, so to speak, they're back home. And when they meet a person in a grocery store or wherever, that person doesn't see a uniform. They don't see, or know about their background. They're just another person. Right. You know what I mean? And so, when you and here like working and talking and in your episodes,
I always love that he comes across, while he's like energetic and his cadence is like that of like the old NWA, AWA wrestlers that I grew up watching, which I love.
Yeah.
But it never is in that realm of I'm the type of guy that has to have somebody pat me on the back and tell me how great I am. And, you know, I don't know, like it just comes across as like sincere. And there's talk of music, there's talk of living positive, there's sharing all these tidbits, you know, and knowledge that you guys have. And I don't know, it always makes for great conversation. I dig that. And then also when he's doing things, like I told you, I'd met a guy who did, you know, 6 years in the 82nd Airborne. And he's the one that first told me about Pat McNamara, like years and years and years ago. And this guy had been a soldier deployed in an airborne infantry unit several times. And then he had taken one of Pat's classes, rifle classes. And he's like, man, like I learned more in that class than I ever knew about firing a rifle and moving and reloading, you know, all that than I ever learned overseas in the 82nd Airborne Infantry Unit, in combat, firing, exchanging rounds with the enemies. Like, I don't know why the Army doesn't like train you that way from the very beginning. And it was an eye opener to me because I like this guy. Like, I respected him. He's just as kind of ego free, low key as could be. Was going through college, had his stuff wired tight, wanted to get into law enforcement. And he saw me do a presentation. That's how we met. And but when he told me, I was like, all right. And then I looked him up, and you know, he's doing like videos and stuff. And you just see people when they're instructors, and you know, okay, that person cares more about like presenting their information and sharing it so someone else can be better at their job and protecting themselves or a third person or, you know, another person. And it comes across that way. I can kind of see the BS from people in that, and the market's flooded with it. And I get very like just turned off. Like, I don't care. Like, it just, but man, when I saw it, I was like, all right, this dude. And what's interesting is like the first few videos I saw him doing transitions and drills and stuff, immediately just there was some vibe like that dude had to be like a metalhead growing up.
Oh yeah.
Like, I mean, he wasn't even making metal references back then, but then as I've heard y'all talk about music and stuff, I'm like, yeah, that all makes sense, man.
Yeah,
He's
a total metalhead. Like, yeah, so you know, one of our favorite things to do is to sit down and just talk about music. We'll talk about all kinds of music. Obviously, metal is important to us, and so some of our best times. He said it to me just the other night. He said, "Dude, it's been too long. You need to come by the house. We like to sit around the fire and we just crank music and drink bourbon and stuff." No, he's the real thing, man. I think I told you offline, and I love whenever his name, people are like, I don't mean to talk about Mac while dude, trust me. I love Pat Mac, and I love that people love him. And because he's one of my best friends, man. And I love telling people who have great respect for him that he's even better than you think he is, man. And I mean that. I mean, he is. We've never had a disagreement, never an argument, never anything. And we completely rely on each other for so much. He's extremely kind. Now, don't get me wrong. If he doesn't know you, again, I'm talking about the Mac that I know, you know, but he's incredibly generous, incredibly kind. There is no ego in him. I always use a Bible verse for him that says, behold an Israelite in whom there is no guile. And that word guile means there's no crafty, shifty, manipulating, you know what I mean? He's just pure to the bone, you know. That's Mac. Mac is pure to the bone. And he's been a delight to work with. And I love, again, as I said, I love the fact that people really do respect and look up to him. We are dealing with, which I'm glad he's differentiated himself from the others, you know, after the GWAT, you know, these two massive wars. We've never been at war for that long. So now you have all of these military people, particularly the special operations community, are now flooding back into civilization. and they're realizing, wow, I don't just have to go into law enforcement or something like that, or teach firearms or what have you. They are flooding into the online space, and they're becoming influencers because people respect the fact that they're special operations and the type of person and training and discipline you have to have in order to be that. I think the mistake that gets made is just because you're very effective in the battle, the combat space, means you need to be dispensing life advice.
Yeah.
And granted, they can for sure, and there's certain things that you can apply, but again, to the hammer, everything is a nail. And so that's everything. I started Metal Motivation on Halloween of 2009. That's when I launched my Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, everything. Still, we're doing MySpace even at that time. So I've been at the personal brand on social media going on 16 years now. So I've been doing it longer than 99% of the people out there. Yeah. Now, when I was doing, there wasn't hardly anybody doing anything about motivational stuff, particularly calling themselves the Metal Motivator, having a niche audience. So a lot of these people, to me, are all Johnny-come-latelys. So now your grandmother's posting motivational stuff.
Yeah,
I'm sick of it at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm still doing it, but it's a love-hate relationship, to be honest with you. It's not that I don't care about people. It's just that it's such a flooded space, and not everybody can be, the voice for all things. So things are becoming very compartmentalized, very differentiated, very niche oriented, which is good. I just don't know ultimately where it goes. But now you've got this, again, the special operations community that are doing it. So the temptation is to maybe make yourself more than you are.
Yes. Same way in the police world.
Oh, I imagine.
There are people that they'll do a couple of years on patrol. And I'll tell you this, a patrol officer in a city that's got a high call volume, they can be incredible and know a whole lot about their job in a very short amount of time. And then cops that have got to work in, rural counties, and they're all out there on their own, and they've got, an apartment complex or a trailer park that's just wide open all the time, and they got to handle business. Yeah, you can get a lot of experience, but I have noticed that trend, that the same way in the cop world, like people will do 7 or 8, 9 years, whatever, on patrol, and then they get into podcasting, they get into influence, whatever. And instead of just staying in that realm and just being like, yeah, these are the things I did, I can't really speak on that because I never did. Like you said, they kind of start to sell themselves a little more, extend out past what they've really done and what their kind of experience has been. And what I hate the most is when they put it out there first, like I am like the term LEO, like law enforcement officer or whatever. I don't know. I always just say cop, because it was like growing up, like, to me, it was like cops were the people who were like getting in it, getting in car chases, getting guns off of dudes, doing, drug work, gang work, whatever, but were really good at what they did and didn't live that way, like boosted up egos or whatever. But what goes on is that trend. And now it's tough to kind of overcome that, because there's a generation interested in law enforcement, and they're polarized. They get to either see the TikTok dancing cops, and all these weird department social media tricks, to humanize the badge or whatever, the term is. And then you've got multiple podcasts out there, and sometimes people are just straight up rude, or I don't know, that they just do a very negative image of what police work is. And I always look at it and go, if somebody's listening to me talk about that job, I want them to be compassionate, to be intelligent. That doesn't mean they got to have a college degree. I want them to be intelligent, to be thinkers, problem solvers, and then not be scared to go in harm's way. That's it. Yeah. And then to go into that field. And if they're going to listen to podcasts, or like they want to, hear what's going on in that world, listen to really good shows with people who've done that and can give you really good advice. Don't get suckered for what looks like the Jerry Springer show kind of thing. I don't know.
I'll often tell all kinds, because again, the other side of my life is marketing, branding, and all that sort of stuff. So I've done actually more speaking and presentations on how I do what I do than motivational stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So because that's how this started. Metal Motivation was a case study in what I called idea-driven branding in the new era of social media. Because prior to social media, again, my degrees are in visual communications. So I've been like 35 years I've been in this field.
Okay.
So I was there for the desktop revolution. I was there for the start of the internet. I was there for the rise of social media, all of these things. So I've watched the principles of marketing and these things sort of morph and change over time. But what was significant about social media was prior to social media, if you wanted information, you searched for it, right? After social media, information was shared. And that was a huge development in the evolution of communications, because if I was a, metal motivator in 2003, very difficult to do it, because nobody's getting on Google or Alta Vista or Yahoo.com and searching, I wonder if there's a heavy metal version of Tony Robbins. You know what I mean? They're not all they're looking for is how to be more motivated, and whatever comes up is whatever comes up. They don't care who it is, male, female, what they listen to. They don't give a shit. They just want the information. But after social media, you could now share things. And so I always tell people, it's like if you had COVID, for example, and you're standing in the middle of a summer Saturday afternoon in Times Square, New York City, where people are just walking by you, and you're going to try to infect as many people as you can by breathing heavy or coughing, you're not going to have a lot of luck doing that. But if I get you on a full commercial airliner and you start coughing, we're going to get a whole lot more people infected. Why? Because it's encapsulated. It's contained. So social media is the internet contained. So the issue now is virality, right? For something to go become contagious, spread from person to person. Therefore, now you could start to create what they call personal brands, not the brands like Coca-Cola, Apple, and Nike anymore, personal brands. And if they're idea driven, right? Some people think, oh, my brand is I always wear orange. That's not a brand.
That's a Tennessee Volunteers fan.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's not a brand. That's just, so when your logo is the same on the label, is the same on your website, you think that's not branding. A logo is not branding. So branding is when you own an idea in the mind of the marketplace. There's tons of motivational speakers. There's one metal motivator. Well, people say, well, what is metal motivation? It's like Tony Robbins meets Metallica. And they're like, fuck, I get it. Dude, that's killer. They may not be into it or whatever. They're just, that's a great idea. Branding is about owning a piece of mental real estate, and the way you break into the mind when it's a crowded marketplace of other competing brands is through an idea-driven brand that's highly differentiated. And so that's the thing. So if you don't have the sort of technical scientific knowledge of branding and marketing, and you're just a Green Beret or a former street cop who's just going to start something, it's like, well, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Because you're sooner to become an echo than you are going to become a voice. And what happens is you get like a pack of wild dogs. They're all sniffing each other's ass. So nobody's saying anything unique or innovative, or not that that's the goal. You ultimately want to help people. So I'll tell people personally, if I was to talk to a bunch of former, special ops guys or cops or whoever it is who's trying to get into the online space, they say, all right, I should start a podcast. Why? Because everybody else has a podcast.
All right.
Not necessarily. Yeah. I would say if I were you, I would be more focused on my personal brand and target getting yourself as a guest on podcasts. Because there's so many podcasts, there's more guests needed than there are more hosts needed.
Yeah.
Right. So go be a guest on someone else's show. So that would be focusing then on what's unique about you. What's unique about your message? I guarantee you there's something unique about you. Might not think there is, but if I take you through my marketing black coffee routine, you know what I mean? And sober you up and get and really start to explore what you're about. What I'll find is what you're most about is not what you're leading with. I've had this happen so many times with clients in the past. Some company I'm working with, and they're like, this is their market slogan, and this is what they're like. They're struggling, and they say, hey, I want you to take a look at our branding. I always find their most unique selling point 4 pages deep in a brochure they don't use anymore.
Okay.
It's something, and then when I bring it out from the archives, blow the dust off of it and say, this is what you're about. And they're like, holy crap. You're right. What the hell were we doing? Well, it was my secretary suggested this slogan. It's not, they're not focusing on what their unique selling point is. They're not focusing on the unique problem that they solve. Your value in the marketplace, whether you're an influencer or on the job, your value in the marketplace is determined by the problem you solve.
Yeah.
That's why you pay a lawyer more than you pay a cop.
Yeah.
Right. They solve bigger problems.
Hey, look, for now, I think
for now,
the trend continues.
Right.
You got departments out there that are like, we're paying, $60,000 signing bonus because nobody wants to be a cop
anymore. Right.
We'll see, but you are right. Yeah.
So that's the reality now for these things on social media, but for just the average person who has to wade through the stack of how many podcasts and how many influencers and how much content there is on any given subject, you're going to know what you gravitate towards. But I've always kept it that the most simple principle-based content is typically going to be the best, and you'll be able to discern, so long as you're not wowed by war stories and street stories and all of these sorts of things. Somebody doesn't have to necessarily be anything in their previous life in order to have something valuable to say. But I think, at the end, everybody just wants a better life. Everybody just wants, those gradual incremental improvements. They're not asking for the world. When they're not asking to be super successful. It's just like, man, I just want to be able to know my bills are paid, save some money. I want to treat my wife better. I'd love to just lose this weight. If you'd have seen me 15 years ago, dude, I was lean and mean, and I'm not quite sure how to get this weight off. And my kids are rebellious. And, I just find myself falling into the same rut. I come home, I grab a beer, I sit on the couch, I watch TV. I know I should be exercising. I know I should be out maybe doing some of the yoga. I don't know, man. I'm confused. I'm frustrated, but I don't seem to be doing anything about it. I just keep putting it off, blah, blah, blah. That's where most people are. Most people are stuck. Most people are in a rut. And believe it or not, you don't need that much.
Yeah.
You ultimately don't need that much. All you got to do is show up every day. But in order to show up every day, you don't need a personal transformation. I would try to get people early on in my mental motivation stuff into doing something more extensive, more in-depth coursework kind of thing. But I soon realized that people only came to my content to get enough motivation to get through another bad day. They only wanted enough inspiration to keep tolerating a life that they did not like. They weren't ever going to be, maybe like you or me, would say, okay, if I need to learn something, I'm going to, take an online course. I'll read the book. I'll take a class, whatever I got to do to learn and grow. I'm committed to doing that. The majority of people are not committed to doing that, but God bless them. If you're just doing that, all you got to do is show up to today. Then all you need is a little momentary boost, whatever it takes to keep you going, man. You're going to get there. You may be taking the long way. You may be going up a muddy, steep slope, but hey, if so long as you're making progress, I wish you would do more. I wish you would commit yourself to more. And the more you get that taste for results, maybe you will. Maybe that will feed the fire. But
Yeah, it's when you talk about exercise, and we all kind of go through those kind of peaks and valleys. And man, I had years where, because of work and just life, I was not on a good exercise pattern, and you can tell, like my body, my brain, everything.
Mm-hmm.
But now I tell a lot of people, well, first, like when I say, hey, I'm retired, because people, how you meet people and they go, oh, what do you do? And that, there, it's kind of part of the conversation. If I say I'm retired, the first thing people do is like, whoa, like what?
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess people have this image, if you make it in any job to retirement, you're just burned out, and all you want to do is just kind of sit around and do nothing. And I'm kind of the opposite. Like now, I joke, I feel like I'm aging backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I go on walks, we exercise. I talk about this all the time. And there's this thought pattern that people have where it's almost like they have to have an epiphany to start, shedding that weight or whatever. It's like, just when I say exercise, I mean simple movements, push-ups, flutter kicks, squats. Like, but you don't even have to have weights initially. Just start to do a little bit at a time. Don't set this goal that, by next week I'm going to be doing 100 push-ups. It's like, can you just do more push-ups today than you did, yesterday, or vice versa? You didn't do any push-ups yesterday, so just do one. Like, can you do one push-up today? And it's weird. Like, it sounds silly, but if people look at it that way and then go, is it kind of that easy? It's like, yeah, it's that easy. Like nobody goes out for a walk and walks 25 miles. It just doesn't happen that way. But if you just walk a little each day, you start to realize, like, you keep putting on more and more time and more and more time, and it feels better for you. And I don't know, like I look at it that way because I haven't worked out in like a paid gym since the first year when I got out of the Army. I got out of the Army, went with my cousin to a Gold's Gym, and I had to pay every month for it, which felt weird because I was coming out of the Army where I was like, I was in the best shape of my life for free. I wasn't paying some facility. Now I enjoyed lifting weights then, and he had a good routine, and I bulked up, and I was happy where I was. But that was the last time. Like I'm a big proponent of, just for me personally, of just exercise, movement, sunlight. I prefer to work out with my wife. I can work out alone. I've done that most of my life. But I prefer walking with her, and then, doing our exercise and routines and lifting and stuff afterwards. Sure. But it's all here at the house. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. My thing is, like, I just don't like putting up self-imposed barriers. Yeah. And looking at it and going, man, if only I could get to the gym, I could do this. Like, no, I got a driveway, I got a front yard, whatever. Garage.
Yeah, well, that's Pat Mack, man. He's his setup is crazy. And and he's making it even less and less and less. People send him stuff all the time, to use and endorse, whatever, and he'll try it out, and if it works, he'll give that company some love. But he's the best. In fact, every Thursday night, tonight we're doing one. In our coaching group, we do a live stream, and in the live stream, because he posts on his Instagram his workouts. So he has this Combat strength training program, and so it has different days of the week, like power day, strength day, speed and quickness, hypertrophy, skills. So he makes up all his own exercises. Again, he's out there in his driveway. He's got the resistance bands. He's got the CMB balls. He's got all kinds of crazy stuff. And we do, because his videos are short, just a minute, and you're just seeing clips of things. So you don't really know what he's thinking, why he's doing it, all that kind of stuff. So we do something called Inside the Grind, which is I upload all, like this kind of software you're using here with your live streaming. So I'll drop in the videos, I download them and just drop them into play, and he'll talk about what he was thinking and what he was doing. And so we get into the gory details of all of that. And so, I've been living in Mac's world now for the past few years, and it's changed everything. I mean, I always worked out. Exercise and diet are huge to me. I've been on the ketogenic diet since January of 2016. Okay. I've done this, and before that, I was doing just kind of a bodybuilder's kind of like diet, that kind of thing. So it's always been important to me. But when you get around him and guys like him, everything takes on a different. It's a different format, like a personal. Like I was not a situationally aware person for the most part, and crap, man. You can't exist around people like that and stay the way that you are, And so, yeah, I mean, he taught me how to shoot. He's taught me a lot, about those sorts of things. And that's where that's his wheelhouse, But yeah, you couldn't get him to pay money for a gym. You couldn't get him to do whatever, but he went through for the past few years. He's been kind of coming out of it for the past year, but something called PMR, polymyalgia rheumatica. It came out of nowhere. It devastated his body. I mean, dude, he couldn't. All he wanted to do all day was stay in a chair. And a lot of the people who had it would end up with walkers. And you're talking about excruciating chronic pain, stiffness, total lack of enthusiasm, sapped all of his natural motive. And Mac is highly motivated. It sapped everything. And this was a quiet battle he was going through for a couple of years. And we talk about it a lot. We had an episode on our podcast dedicated to it. And I watched him battle through that. And he would sometimes have to sit there for a half an hour just to get himself to start moving. He would sit outside, he'd make himself sit outside with the gym, and this is cold, rain, hot, didn't matter. And the last thing he wants to do is anything out there in that driveway. That's the last thing he wants to do. But he would sit there, turn on heavy metal, and he would just sit there and just get his mind right and then just start moving. And it would take, 10, 15 minutes before he would get lubricated enough to where he could tolerate doing the stuff. And then he would still shoot his videos and whatever. But people didn't know, man, but he was suffering. He was suffering big time during that. And again, specifically with the lack of will to do it, let alone the chronic pain. Couldn't sleep. So, not many of us, we really don't have excuses for it. And I, like both you and I just said, do what you can. Ultimately, I want you to turn into a beast. Ultimately, I want you to become ferocious. Ultimately, I want you to attack life. And I think anybody can. Even if you've never lived that way in your life, you can do it. There's a way to do it. You can reorient. You can change the way that you think, change the way that you see things. You just got to believe it's possible first. We can get you to that place. Then we can start to go to war on the things that undermine your ability to become that, particularly, your self-doubt and insecurity and all these other things. But it's doable, man.
That's that's why I say, like, just that little step, because it's we human beings, we are our own worst enemy. Like, absolutely. We literally can self-destruct or talk ourselves out of the success that people are capable of. And just like that, that's a prime example of one having the sheer will to do something, and the two parts of your brain, like the one part of your brain that's like, no, like here's the pain receptors, here's the lethargy kind of setting in and just saying, no, sit here. And then your other part of the brain's like, like, no, no, I'm going to do this, kind of thing. And what I hate or what I hope doesn't happen with people is they hear a story like that. And then they go, oh, well, because of his military background, he can just do that. He's just different than me. I can't do things like that. And that's the part, like, I always hate to hear people talk like that. I heard it's a crazy story. Long story short, I was a patrol sergeant, carload of 4 guys. They get sideswiped in a rainstorm. Now, the only reason I'm bringing up race is because the part of the city I worked in was predominantly black. And at the time, man, like, racial tension was high. And people, if you were what the world saw as a white cop in the South, even though you're in a big city, they immediately just thought you were a racist. racist, boom, boom. So I grew up that way. I've had people call me all kinds of names. Like that doesn't bother me. So I'm standing there. I get on the scene. And again, I'm a patrol sergeant. So some sergeants sit at a friggin' desk and do nothing. Like I was always out in the field. I always wanted to help my officers. And I also wanted another car out there present in some of the very violent areas we had. Anyway, I pull up on the car. There's 4 guys in there, and the rain's starting to kind of let off a little bit, but we're talking. I'm getting their information. And so I'm kind of just joking and cutting up with them. And the beat officer calls up and he's like, "Hey, Sarge, I'll come. I'll take the report, whatever." And I'm like, "Okay, we're good right now. We're off the roadway." Well, this van slowly rides by, and it sees me, this white officer, talking to a car with 4 black guys in it. Like they're probably about 20, 21. And the driver yells, "Stop harassing them." And I look at the guys and I was like, "Isn't that funny?" Driver immediately thinks I am somehow harassing you guys, that there's no way possible you could actually be the victims in this crime in which someone did a hit and run. Like that never came across their mind, but yet somehow they're quick to point the finger and somehow think I'm harassing you guys, that I'm not actually here trying to help you. So they're all laughing. And I said, "Now, who wants to be a cop?" Joking. And 3 of them look at their buddy in the backseat immediately. And so then I know, oh, this guy wants to be a cop. And he laughs and they're like, he does. So I was like, all right, man, like tell me about it. You like when I say be a cop, like I'm talking about putting in work, like be there for the community, go after people with guns and stuff. He's like, "Man, I want all that. Like I grew up here, like I want it." And I was like, okay. And so we're still raining a little bit. So we just start talking about that. And I was always big about trying to change perceptions as well. And if anybody ever showed interest, I'd do anything I could to help them out.
Yeah.
So I tell them, "Hey man, here's my phone number. If you're serious about doing police work, you give me a call tomorrow. You contact me and we can talk a lot more. And I'll tell you all the ins and outs, and I'll help you however I can." Because I didn't have that when I was applying. I got lucky. The department I knew about and got hired had all these great options to get into like real police work. So anyway, he calls me the next day, contacts me, and he's just like, "Hey, do you remember me?" I was like, "Of course I remember you, dude." Like that was the highlight of my night, man. So we talk, message back and forth now for the rest of the day. And he's like, I'm getting all my information together now. I'm pulling all my sources. I'm going to apply to be a cop. I was like, "Yeah, dude." So he ends up applying. He gets on with a sheriff's department in the area and invites me to his graduation. So it's, like flash forward like a year down the road, because it's a long process to get hired and go through the academy. So I go to his graduation, and at that time I was working intel assignment, gang intel stuff. But I go to his graduation, and one of the guest speakers is giving them like a motivational speech, and he says, basically, "I don't ever want to hear about cancer being, in this department, cancer." And he keeps talking about cancer, and I'm like, man, gosh, like something bad must have happened. And then he stops and he's like, "What I'm talking about is I don't ever want to hear y'all say in your career that I can't serve." And I was like, it kind of stuck with me. Some people were like, "Oh, that's hokey, that's cheesy." And he was an older guy, but I was like, okay, like I can dig that. Like that was pretty cool for that. Like what he was trying to tell them is, don't, because everybody's going to tell you that. The people in the community are going to tell you that. Your coworkers are going to tell you that. The media is going to tell you, like all these negative things. They're going to assume negative things about you, and then you're going to start telling yourself like you can't do something.
Yeah.
That you can do anything and everything in this career. You set your path and you go make it happen. And not just like stuff like that. When there were days when I even had buddies that would kind of, I don't want to say lose hope, but they would get demotivated and they'd just be like, "Man, this is not good. Like I don't feel good. I don't like coming to work. There's news story after news story. Officers are getting indicted for doing their job. Like it was a rough time." And I would tell them like, any little glimmer of hope you can get like that, like do it. And test the waters, like test with people and say things like that. Like, "Oh, who wants to be a cop now?" the public harass you.
Right.
And then you find people like that they want to do something like that, and then you do what you can to help them forward.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like that.
Exactly.
Those are the things in any field, whatever people are doing. If you're helping that next generation get in and keep them motivated, so to speak, or just get them on the right path, it feels 10 times better. Like I got to do a lot of really great stuff in my career, but I also look back at people who either got out of the gang life or who were caught in cycles of just drug addiction and how their lives got better and that sort of thing. Or going and being able to talk to teenagers and stuff. And then you hear follow-up stories about how they grow up, like stuff like that I think in the law enforcement world and maybe other careers as well, there's a lot of emphasis on medals and awards.
Yeah.
And like who got the biggest bust and who didn't. Let me tell you, like I'm all about that. Like I love doing work like that. But there's also something about it when you see handwritten letters from people or someone, pulls you aside at a presentation. Like I had a young girl pull me aside. I was talking to a bunch of teenagers and a lot of them were on a really bad path. And so in the presentation, I'm actually talking about very specific gangs that I know these girls are around and what their lives are like and that sort of thing. And we're talking real, like this is not a gangs are bad, okay? Like we're talking very serious things. And some of them, sadly, I could say, hey, you're probably about 6 months, if not less, from seeing a loved one or someone in your apartment complex getting shot and killed. That you will either wake up and see it, or you'll be standing right there when the bullet goes through the body. And one of those girls, her older brother had been shot and killed within that time frame. Only because you start to see these patterns. But
Sure.
One of the girls that pulled me aside and asked me if I knew a certain officer, and I did. He was a training officer for me at one point, and he and I, rode together for about 2 weeks. He was doing an eval on me when I was a rookie. But moving forward, he and I kind of crossed paths in different gang assignments. But I mean, this dude was like gray, flat top, former Marine, just like he was legit. You know what I mean? Like on the street, everybody knew him and they were like, hey, treat him with respect because he'll tune you up. He had this very hard side, but I found out from her, she was a victim in a crime and he was attached to he was assigned to a gang intel unit, and he would go by her house every day and check on her and check on what was going on in the neighborhood and talk with her guardian at the time. And she said, like, that meant the world to me. And her case was taken care of. But I always thought back, like, man, he never told me that. I wish he would have. I wish he would have said, hey, like, make time for people, do this. I don't know. I don't know why he didn't tell me that. I wish he would have.
Yeah.
But for her to tell me that, and then she said she kept in contact with him. And she's like he was like what I would think a dad would be, like a father. She didn't have a father. So she was like, he was taking time out of his day to talk to me and to warn me about future things. And this guy was a great cop anyway. And he raised his own daughter. He was a single parent, but those sides you don't see. You see this dude running and gunning and just like he was a wild man on the job. But then that sensitive side, or that side that was smart enough to know in his age and wisdom, hey, nobody's there for her, kind of thing, and we need to be there for her. So I don't know. I say all that to say some of the like toughest dudes that I knew and worked with were doing things that meant the world to people that you never get to see, or there's not an award written or an award you put on your chest. And
no, it's good. Yeah, just being faithful where you are. Everybody's got their little measure of influence, and just all we have to do is shore up our corner of the world. Just be faithful.
So now, for people listening, what all have you got going on right now, and how can they reach you? How can they contact you? How can they hear more about you if they don't already? A lot of people already know who you are.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, if anybody wants I would just encourage them to follow on social media. So if you're on Instagram, it's at Metal Motivator.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on Facebook, it's at Metal Motivation.
Okay.
So either one of those will get you there. I've got a YouTube channel. Again, it's at Metal Motivation. So youtube.com, Metal Motivation. And that's probably the best way. So much of what I do is for others, in the sense of like working with Pat Mack, working with companies and that sort of thing. So again, it's like Metal Motivation is more the case study in my concept of idea-driven personal brand. It doesn't mean there's tons of stuff on there. So if anybody wants to follow, but that's why I was able to talk about, the marketing stuff that we talked about.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably the best way to
Good
follow.
deal. Hey, since we talked about all this music, are there any bands, I don't care if they're new, old, whatever, that you would like put somebody on like right now if they're like, hey, I need some good tunes, like I need some music that I want.
Well, are they? I mean, if they're not into heavy music, then you want to give them all the gateway drugs.
No, we'll say they're into heavy music.
If they're into heavy music, shoot. Some of this stuff is so genre specific, so it's hard to say what somebody might like, because I might say, dude, I've been listening to a lot. I listened to the latest Evergrey album and it's badass, but it's kind of like a symphonic Swedish, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But I love bands like Evergrey. For power metal, I love bands like Primal Fear. Of course, I'm always going to love Lamb of God. It's really more that kind of contemporary stuff. But I like when you get into, like, if you want something a little bit more hardcore-ish, you might get into some Municipal Waste or Iron Reagan, stuff like that. I love stuff like that. There's a lot of great young up-and-coming thrash bands. Of course, Havoc has been around for a while. Lazarus AD. Stuff. I mean, it's everywhere. There's so many stinking bands. But yeah, I mean, it's all over the place. I tend to like now just I'll like put certain artists in and just let then the streaming services start creating playlists. I'm kind of more looking to discover.
Yeah, me too. That's why I say that. Yeah. It's cool because people will reach out and sometimes they'll be like, hey, this guest was pretty interesting, but man, I really loved at the end when y'all were talking about music, because that person, references whatever, Red Clay Strays or something like that. And they're just like, hey, I'm going to check that out. And so people have said, hey, why don't you just have like a list on Spotify of every like band or song that people are referencing from the guest spots? Well, that's a good idea.
What people might like is actually Mac has a very popular Spotify playlist. He calls it the Metal Mac Attack Spotify playlist.
Okay.
Just look up Metal Mac Attack on Spotify, and he's been building that over the last several years. It's got everything, new and old, for metal, and it's a great way just to kind of get people introduced to all types of heavy metal. But that'd probably be a good place for someone to start.
Yeah. Good deal. Well, CJ, I appreciate your time, buddy.
Same here, Brian. Thank you. Man.
And, if we can get together at some point in the future, I want to do a few more episodes of different topics and stuff. But I really enjoyed it, man. I appreciate it, buddy.
Me too. Great to have you.
All right, buddy. Take care, man.
Take care.